Hey, today's topic, I'm going to talk about how I differentiate team and individual success because it's a very complicated subject. And this is something I've been thinking about more and more as I've been studying CSGO and Dota 2 for a long period of time. And I originally come from StarCraft 2, where there isn't that extra layer of depth you have to think about to evaluate a player's strengths relative to the field. And it gets even more complicated because of how rosters, teamwork, tactics, and an individual's play style and how all of that works into each other in a sense. And so this is how I've been doing it. I don't know if I'm wrong. I don't know if I'm right, but this is the way I've been doing it so far. So, in a previous video, I talked about how I use like the Dota 2 system in a sense, where I basically look at the team, the 5 individual parts, and then I look at the individual styles of the players, where they like to play, what they like to play, their early round, the mid round, late round, and I try to figure out, in a sense, who is getting the most resources on the team and who is getting the least resources, and then I number it from 1 to 5. So, for instance, in the current SK roster, I think there are 2 ones. coldzera and perf have been given all the resources, in a sense. And then I think there are 2 4s. I think bolts and fallen are the 2 4 positions in that scenario. Because when I look at Fallen as a player, when I think of him as a opper, I think he is definitely the guy who wants to go in first to get that initial pick. But in general, he's been letting players like Fur open it up. And in that sense, there had to be like a sacrifice because it's not like you can have both players go aggressive. They tried that before with Phelps, and it didn't work. It didn't work consistently enough for their tastes. So I think Fallen's basically fallen back a bit, and he's taken up more passive positions, or he's taken up like second priority in terms of aggressive pick potential. So Fur has to go down first before he's allowed to go to work, in a sense. And as for Bolts, I think Bolts is 4 just because he likes to play these passive. He likes to play these passive angles, and he likes to play. What's the word I'm looking for? He likes to play the support positions, I guess. That's a way you could talk about it. And because of that, he isn't really getting, there isn't a lot of resources that needs to be given to Bolts in that sense. Because even though he likes to play those positions, the thing is that nobody's really contesting him to play those positions. The only person that might have contested him is Taco, and Taco is a straight 6 in this system, in the sense that he's willing to do whatever the team needs, and he fills out the roles. So he's a true 6, and there aren't that many of those in Counter-Strike, especially at the top level. So that's kind of how I build that particular team. And now we have to talk about the relationship of teamwork to tactics. And tactics is a very hard concept to think about, because it's hard to distance it from both teamwork and from individual play. And what I mean by that is when SK do their 1-1-1-1-1 on Mirage, is it really a tactic when Fur goes in on the right timing and gets 2 kills and opens up the site? I don't really know, right? Is it a teamwork? Kind of is. It's kind of individual play too, isn't it? And so SK is one of the harder teams to look at, but it's also why I chose that team, because it forces you to think, where does the tactics end? Where does the teamwork begin? And where does the individual individual performance begin? And the reason I and then I'll refer back to the Dota 2 system, or how I'm constructing these teams in my mind. And so when you are 1 like Fur, or you are 1 like coldzera, in that particular sense, you have to consistently deliver the impact and the frags that the team is trying to set you up for. And that's why both of them are so highly rated, is because they've done it in 2017. They've basically done it for almost the entire year, both of them. Fur probably less so, in the sense that like I feel like he dropped off towards the end a little bit. Not as good or not as crazy as he was before, but given his role in the team, it's actually kind of crazy he was that good to begin with, and it's why you can make a pretty decent argument for him as the best player of 2017, even though he was on a team with Cold. And as for Cold, he is always a player that they set up to get into the mid round, to get into the late round situations, and then just close it out over and over and over again, because he has such great synergy with every single player on that team, especially with Taco, but with Fallen, with Fur, with even Bolts now. And so if you put Cold, Zera in those positions, he's going to be able, because what happens is it's very similar to the way a CSGO round breaks down. It's very similar to chess in the sense that all the situations are kind of broken apart. All the early game structure is gone. And so now you have to be able to read the game. You have to be able to read the positions. You have to be able to figure out what are the tendencies of the players, what is the optimal move, and then counter that or make a move that kind of shifts the positions over. And Cold Zera is a master of this. He's also a master of the 1vx situation, probably, in my opinion, the best 1vx player in the world. And so that's how they set up Cold Zera, and that's how they set up Fur, and that's why you have to give them much high. You have to, when you rate their individual performance, you have to put them at a much higher pedestal compared to the rest of the players on this team, because they're given so many resources to perform, and they do perform. And when they do perform, that's why you give them like the MVP award for how good they are, right? And that's kind of, and I haven't really explained how this works in the teamwork differentiation or or how it differentiates or tactics, because it's such a strange system they run where it kind of runs through all three. But now I'm going to contrast that to something I saw in the early days of CSGO, and that's the existence style of tactics specifically against NIP, because those are the games I watched the most of. And what existence does in both force rounds and in rifle rounds is he creates a bunch of situations where it doesn't depend on the skill of the player necessarily for them to win rounds. What I mean by that is he's able to figure out, either through prep or through the reading of the ongoing game, where the positions of the CTs are, where they're playing at, how they're playing. And what he does from that point on is he has a set playbook where he'll pull out a play where it's like, okay, if we use this play here, we will get a 2v1 or 3v1 against this player. And that is, in my mind, what you call a tactic. Is you're looking at the situation, because it's not like there's no CT setup in the world where you can perfectly cover all possibilities on any map. Not even, I think, at least, or yeah, I don't think there is, not even like on old Nuke, in a sense, because there's always going to be tendencies you can break apart if you understand how they are playing, what they are playing. And while it's very hard, the fact that you eventually switch sides anyway kind of evens it out. So it's always relative to that map. And so that's why I think existence is like a perfect counterpoint to the current SK, just because the way he ran his tactics, he always consistently, in my opinion, forced situations where his team was favored in the tactic, just in terms of pure manpower. He'd always find either a way to create, he always find a way to either adapt. Like there's instances where like NIP would push 4 down mid on Inferno, and then he'd instantly have the 2 banana guys, him and somebody else, try to challenge Freiburg at B, knowing that's a free 2v1. And even though that doesn't work out because Freiburg just headshots both of them, it's actually, in my opinion, the correct tactic, even if it doesn't work out. And the way he existence, that is, the way he thinks about the game, in a sense, it's very structured, it's very rigid. At least we're talking about very old, like 2013. No, 20. No, I think it's 2012 actually. Let me check real fast. I'm really bad with time. But basically, that's kind of how I think about the tactics of the that's kind of how I think about tactics in general. It's the overall structure of the plan in the initial round, and then after that it becomes a bit more complicated because in the mid round, in the late round, it might not necessarily be about the tactic as much as it is about the teamwork. And teamwork is another hard question to look at, just because yeah, it's 2012 to 2013, right? So basically, teamwork is a very hard question to look at, just because it kind of links together with both tactics and individual skill in a sense. Like, it's hard to quantify comms. It's hard to quantify information being passed from one player to the other, and so that's why you will never get a perfect picture of what is going on in the game, because even if you did go back and watch all 10 point of views of a particular game, you're kind of missing. There's going to be instances where you kind of miss the communication of between the players, or somebody pushes up an area, it doesn't convey that he has pushed up this area, and so you've created a terrible situation on the other side of the map. Like, this happened in Inferno, in NIP versus Liquid, I think, or it might have been NIP versus Heroic. I'm not exactly sure, but basically this happened at the summit recently, where the setup for NIP was to have like 3 towards A site and then 2 in this weird B position, where they're more towards CT spawn. And while it's like a decent-ish setup because it basically allows Draken to get like a pick and then Rez to like cover him, what happens is like the 3 players on the other side completely left Arch open, and they didn't convey that information to the B players, or maybe they didn't even think about it. Maybe they thought they had some super read. It's hard to say, but basically the team that's playing against just goes down Arch and then wraps on B, and then that B setup between Draken and Rez is completely dead because there's no way they can actually hold that. And so that's kind of more like a problem in teamwork than it is a problem in that particular tactic, because the setup is wrong for the CT side, but it should in CT sides, your setup shifts depending on how the other side is playing and how much area you're covering. And because of the fact that it didn't shift, it tells me that something went wrong with the communication, and that's more of like a problem of the teamwork than it is of the tactic or the individual skills. Because it's not like Rez is allowed to Rez should, no matter how good he is, like kill 3 of them in that position where he has to like cover 2 angles in like 180 degrees, right? And so now we get back to how do I actually differentiate them? Because I've basically just been talking about tactics, teamwork, this individual skill, right? And so how I differentiate all this is I look at the team style, and then how the star players, because they're usually the ones, like in the system, in the Dota 2 system I run, they're the ones in that case. And in that case, you have to look at them specifically to see how they affect the entire structure of the team, and how the leader's ideas, the leader's abilities affect the early rounds, and how they'd like to structure those apart, and how they like to adapt across the series from round to round, from side to side. And so once you figure all of that out, that's when you can kind of move that away, because now you have the context for the individual skill. And at that point, you look at the individual players and their roles within that system. Are they fulfilling the roles in that system? Are they getting what they should be? So, for instance, if you're like a 1 player, you have to consistently be hitting that shot over and over and over again, because even though you got all the good spots, you also have the responsibility of getting all those kills. If you get all the spots you want, or all the resources you want, or the way the team is structured around you have to get that, because that's the way the team is built. Whereas if you are on the lower end, like a 4 or 5, or in the case of Taco a 6, you have much less responsibility to frag out. But what your responsibility is as that position, as that player, and this is how I rate them, is you have to look at the moments where they aren't in a hopeless situation, because they're in like they're hard rules, but there are positions, there are times where they can have huge impact on the game. And in those series, in those like specific rounds, you have to look at that and say, did they do the best thing possible in that position. And that's why I actually think Taco's underrated in that sense, because he usually does it more often than not, despite being in hard roles, despite being in weird positions all the time. So I think that's how you have to think about it. That's how that's what you that's how you differentiate the rules. But there's a final bit you have to think about is what are the weaknesses of the team. And this is a strange way to look at it, but basically when I look at a team, like let's take North, the previous roster. When I look at that team, I think to myself, what is the biggest weakness of this team? And I think the biggest weakness of that team was the late round. I think MSL sets up the early round really well for both CT side and T side, but when you go down to the retakes and you go down to the post plant situations, or you go down to small man scenarios, you go down to these 1vx situations, they break apart because they don't have either the teamwork or the skill. And this is where they don't have the teamwork or the skill where they can win those rounds out consistently enough. And this is why I've been more harsh on AZ, or why I think that why it feels kind of weird to take out Cajun B and on the Opper when he should have been on the rifle, maybe, because it feels like Cajun B, the old one, could have gotten them those wins, could have gotten them those those wins in those scenarios. But on an op, he's much more limited as an opper to win those clutch round, late round scenarios. AZ, he did it okay, but never in the biggest games, never in the playoffs when they needed him to do it. And this is also why I think this current iteration of North has some real potential, because Valde definitely does have some of that. AZ, he's like just okay, but he's more of like a role player. I still think you could replace him with somebody like Rubino, or I guess Dennis is gone, but I think Dennis would have been a great choice. But either way, like somebody like Kirby is actually pretty decent at it. So you're getting more players into the position where you can win those late rounds, and because Config is gone, you have somebody like Mert who can take over the early round a bit more. So there's a bit more hope for this North roster than the previous one, and that's kind of how I rate the individuals and the teams and the tactics and all that. And I guess I'll give one last concrete example is like Cloud9. Like I personally think Cloud9 at the major they had good tactics in the sense that it fit all the players' styles on that team. So for instance, you have like 3 aggressive playmakers, Automatic, Stewie, 2K, and Tarek. And and when they make a move, they're able to call very fast adaptions and reads based off of what is happening on the map, and that's why they have very fast T side play, but they can also shift to a slower side, and they have some set plays, some fakes, stuff like this, right? But the default is their primary way of winning, which is like that fast playmaking style. And they have somebody like Skadoodle, they can just hold an angle so it stabilizes the structure a bit, and then they have like a secondary option in Rush who he can lurk, he can entry, he can clutch it out for them. So they have, between Rush and Skadoodle, they have a baseline of like those guys can kind of rebound the ball or save the game in a sense if like something goes a bit off for that team. And so when you look at those tactics and then you look at the individual players of Cloud9, I think they all played above the level of what I usually saw for them. Like, yeah, Tarek's been the best player on Cloud9, but he went to another level at the major. Stewie's been pretty inconsistent, but he went to another level. Automatic, same. Rush, the same. Skadoodle, the same. Actually, I think Rush is about the same. He didn't go to above the level, but he was still, like, though his role is such that he can't really take over the game, even if he's having a really good game. So between those 5 players, like and then when you look at like the CS Summit, like the individual skill fell off, but the tactics, the ideas of the styles that enables them, that's all the same. And they actually have like a rough time against Liquid, where Liquid actually beat them, right? And so when you look at it that way, you have to think to yourself, was it the tactics, was it the teamwork, or was it like a skill? And in my opinion, I think it was the skill of the individual players, because that has the most changed factors among the 3 different things across like a period of time. So that's kind of how I differentiate individual strength, team strength, and tactics in a sense. And I hope that's enlightening. All right. See you guys later.